here live on the Circle platform again. Reminder that the PDA Insiders website and Circle platform has our weekly live events where we can talk about these things that are topical and have to do with living the PDA lifestyle. You can ask questions if you're a Circle member or if you've become part of our PDA Insiders Hub. That is specifically where I stream these live events and you can attend them in person. We have a 2-week free trial. So if you want to visit pda-insiders.com, you can find on our website where you can start the Hub trial. I finally did get that up on our website. I am a PDA person and I do sometimes struggle with some avoidances, but that's okay. We are patient and kind with each other here, including me being patient and kind with myself. I'll keep my introductions shorter this time since I don't have to kind of get everybody caught up on as many things. I have not yet, our masterclass, the PDA Insiders Masterclass is not quite ready yet for our second round. So we don't have that yet up on our website as a link, but it will be available soon. I am at this point anyway, I don't know if by the time this is published, if I'll have openings still, but I am taking some coaching clients on again. I have a couple openings for that. So if you're interested, you can also find that on our website. Other than that, of course, if you have not heard or yet purchased our book, we have our my book with Sally Cat, The Insider Guide to PDA, that is available on Amazon and also on, it's available worldwide. So it's available through Amazon and it's also available through, my brain is, Barnes & Noble. My brain was completely drawing a blank there. You're welcome. I was happy to hear, I listened to my last recording, so I'm getting my feet wet again, doing these as not only live events, but also as podcasts that I'm publishing on my podcast. I will share this little kind of interesting hack. So I'm always looking for ways to help with my PDA avoidances. I have wanted to do doing podcasts is one of my favorite things to do. And I did them for a while, and then they became inaccessible for me. I just could not juggle the other things going on in my life and also commit energy to doing these. And I feel so grateful that, my life is going smoother. Relationships with my kids and just our basic day-to-day life has gotten so much better, which is good, especially if I'm trying to give advice to others. Like, I'm down there in the trenches with you, but I also have some success with things. We can't predict the future. We can't always control all the elements in our lives. And I never want to make any kind of false promises, but it is encouraging when, someone who understands what it is to go through these things, and even with some limited resources. I'm a single parent. I have some support now from my family, from my mom. My brother lives with me, so he helps with some things. But, I have 3 PDA kids that are at home all the time. And that's kind of inspired today's topic, which is siblings and PDA and the complications that come with raising more than one child, whether they're all PDA or maybe there's some families that only have one suspected PDA or 2 or whatever. Any combinations. It is very tricky juggling multiples. And that is to say, so I'll say this. I think sometimes even having a one PDA or singular is tricky as well. I think I would find that more complicated because I am not the kind of parent that likes to play very much I don't play games very well as a parent. So I am glad that my kids have each other to play with one another. But we'll get to that. I'm going to highlight towards the end, assuming I don't forget. I want to highlight towards the end some of the positives that go along with having multiples and raising them together. You can get to a spot where there are some positives that can come into play with having more than one PDA child. But for now, let's assume it is going hard. It is going rough. And let's start there. So let me pull out my notes real quick. Okay. Let's talk first. What are some common problems that I have heard from families or have experienced myself when it comes to parenting PDA? Now, oftentimes when someone is sharing this specific kind of struggle, what they are talking about is that they have usually one child who is in crisis, and sometimes there's two, sometimes there's more than one in crisis, but oftentimes it's one is in crisis and the others might be doing better, or they may be showing distress behavior in different ways that are maybe more subtle and less explosive. This can create kind of some hostilities between siblings at times if there's one that's very explosive and gets a lot of attention or gets a lot of what they would consider special treatment. And there can be resentment that springs out of this dynamic. And then a parent has to try to explain to their, to one child why, X, Y, and Z, why we're doing this thing for brother or sister. So that's one possible complication with parenting PDA siblings, or just siblings in general, where PDA is in the mix. Another thing that comes up is equalizing. So again, if we have like there are different ways for PDA people to show equalizing, but that people don't realize are like there's internalized PDA, there's externalized PDA. So I'll kind of try to educate a little bit on both as we talk about this. But let's again assume we have an explosive PDA child who is struggling by using a sibling to equalize against. They might target this sibling by, throwing things or fighting or attacking. They might try to control the sibling, trying to control their behavior, their choices, so on. This gets really complicated as a parent because on the one hand, you might be fully invested or on board with the concept that PDA is a disability, but at the same time, you don't want one child to be subject to abusive behavior, at the expense of trying to help another child. So that is another complicating factor here. I'm going to start. I will kind of talk about troubleshooting these things, but let's start bigger picture. What I see happen with families new to PDA is they are typically in crisis, typically new to understanding or learning about what PDA is. Prior to this, maybe there's been a lot of like punitive measures involved, or pushing power struggles and so on. Struggles at public education, trying to get proper supports in. Maybe you've been pushing for public schools to provide appropriate support and it hasn't been working. And so, your child's burned out, you pulled them home, and now you've got kids, at each other's throats, sometimes literally. I like to take a moment to step back and appreciate big picture, that this is a hard time for everybody. So this is a hard time for you as a parent. This is a hard time for siblings, even if they're not showing it in obvious ways. Of course, it's a hard time for the child who's exploding all the time. In fact, I was just listening to, so I'm doing a book study. Excuse me, hold on a second. I was doing a book study with PDA USA. So I'm the CEO of PDA USA. And one of the projects we have is we're doing a book study on highly recommended books for understanding and supporting PDA. And one of those books is the Low Demand Parenting by Amanda Diekman. And Amanda's awesome. She's going to join us live. If you want to learn more about that, that's at pdausa.org. But I'm listening through that book right now, and really what came to mind, or what was emphasized in the book, which I agree with, is that this is hard for everyone. And I think it is important to recognize that everyone in the picture is in some degree struggling. So while you may have to do some very immediate things that are like immediate triage things for the more explosive child, it is good to keep in mind that everybody that's in the situation is having a hard time, even if they're not obviously showing it. Why I think this is important is that we can get kind of tunnel vision. We can start to sacrifice ourselves or sacrifice other people in the situation if they seem to be coping better. We can sacrifice kind of their mental health for the sake of the one. And while it is, I think it is a good model to show like, hey, we do respond to each other. We do show that we care. We are trying for, I'm hoping I make sense here, but we do want to help the most obviously struggling child. I just like to have that on my radar, that I may need to take some moments with other people in our family to kind of touch base and be like, how am I doing? How am I feeling? And how is, sibling feeling? And you may not be able to fix whatever the complaints are or whatever the issues are right away. But if you can at least give some space for them to voice the things, talk it through, then that's something. We can't always bring our A game, especially when we are in crisis and we're trying to fix things. Usually we're at our, C, D, E, F, we're all the way down to Z game. Like we might be at the bottom of the barrel with our game. And we can't magically produce resources to make ourselves better or to make things better. But we can at least start by acknowledging like, hey, this is hard, and we can hear each other in that difficulty and have some empathy and compassion for one another and some solidarity. I think solidarity is a good way to view it. So big picture, I like to kind of start there with this very empathetic, very understanding perspective. Tied to that is keeping expectations in check. I do think it is very important to see the family as a unit. I haven't quite worked out a way to illustrate this yet, but in my mind, I picture the family as like a net. So we are all connected to each other in our family unit. We all have some impact on each other. And it has helped me a lot with my own kids and myself and whoever's in our immediate vicinity to recognize that we do all have this impact on each other. Sometimes this means that we need to isolate. If there is a dangerous, I always got to throw out like kind of the worst case scenarios to start with, because that is oftentimes what's going on. So worst case scenario, if someone's in extreme crisis or a child's in extreme crisis, they are endangering themselves or others, you do want to start thinking about, more serious interventions. I am not in a position here to give any kind of specific advice in a podcast as far as what kind of interventions to recommend, because it really depends on a situation by situation basis. But just know, no one should be getting physically hurt or abused. We don't want to be like turning a blind eye to abuse. I talked about this in the last podcast too. But there are degrees of this. I know sometimes there is a very explosive child who is, that is more inclined to show physical violence, and it's very hard to step in at the last minute and like try to prevent issues, but we do the best we can with what we have. But what I've seen is that when I approach everyone in the family with a low demand or low pressure lens, and when, if child B is coming to me with resentment saying they feel like child A is getting special treatment, I do try to troubleshoot with child B. Well, what do you feel like you need? Because here in this family, like hypothetically, here in this family, we are trying to meet each other where we need. Do you feel like you need, you know, less pressure in your situation somehow? Is there a way we can like resolve some of that for you and mean it, and mean it that, you know, there are some children and adults who show their distress by pushing themselves really, really hard. And that kind of has a side effect of creating some resentment and bitterness towards the other person they show their distress differently. One of my kids will be like, basically like, get it together. you know, he gets very much like, no, this is how it's supposed to be. This is how they're supposed to behave. This is what they're supposed to do. And it's like, yeah, okay, that is the expectation, big picture, but we're trying to support each other. We're trying to help each other. So there's a reason that sibling A is having a particularly hard time. Let's try to figure out, or saying as a parent, it's my job to try to help figure out why that is. That's what I'm doing. I don't just want to punish behavior or or extinguish behavior. Although I might need to intervene for safety, I am not just trying to squash the behavior. I'm trying to understand the behavior. So putting up a barrier of protection as much as possible, limiting damage as much as possible, meaning, if you have a kid that's likely to throw things, projectiles, or attack suddenly or whatever, like definitely do what you can to intervene or limit the amount of damage that can be done. But aside from, limiting damage and making sure there are less opportunities for someone to get hurt or for things to escalate even worse than they already are, there's just understanding that some of us struggle in a certain way and we need to find ways to support each other through it. So I explain that to child B in regards to why I'm doing what I'm doing for child A so that they can understand the goal. And then offering that to child B as well, not forcing it, because again, PDA is surprising. You might have 2 PDA children and not even realize it because, there is kind of this type A sort of child that wants to meet all these expectations. But even if they're not PDA, it's okay to not assume anything, but just offer the same kinds of supports and same kinds of troubleshooting that you're offering the other. And I think that helps prevent, I think it's what I've heard other parents talk about this, but like glass child syndrome, where, one child is catered to because they are in constant crisis and the other children kind of fall into the background. And we can't prevent all of that experience, but I think we really can mitigate a lot of it with some kind communication and helping the other members of the family know how to participate in this goal if they want to. So it's not a perfect solution, but I do think it is a better solution. So this does kind of, segue into how hidden PDA can be. That was actually where we started writing the Insider Guide to PDA with this in mind. It was going to be called, I think the original title of the book was Hidden PDA or something like that, because we wanted to talk about how it can be very well masked and very well hidden, and not in like a, overt forced kind of way where, someone had to pressure another child. In fact, if I can, I am going to do this. So when I edit this for my podcast, I'm going to show a picture of my oldest. So him as an infant, he's smiling, just going. And I know they say, oh, that's gas. No, I promise you, this was not gas. He was looking into our faces, grinning. So he was smiling, and he met all of his milestones. He was, he tried to be he was very sweet and very compliant. He would mask if he was in pain at 4 years old. He would not show that he was in pain. Just things that are not usually attributed with PDA, but he did go mute, selectively mute at age 5 or 6, something like that, 5 or 6. So he suddenly went mute, wouldn't talk to anybody except for our immediate family. And we even lived with my dad, who we caregived for him for years, and my oldest, wouldn't talk to him either. For years. So he showed his avoidance, he showed his overwhelmed by his speech being shut down. And it wasn't, even though it was like situational mutism, it was not a choice on his part. I don't see it as a choice on his part. It was an anxiety triggered thing that other PDA adults have shared, that's an experience they've had as well. So anyway, I guess I'm just taking a second here as far as like, why am I rambling? I don't know. And these podcasts, like I said, I'm rusty. I haven't done these in a while, so I'm a little bit rambly, but I think everybody will just be okay with me rambling. And I'm thinking right now, it's a tangent. I'm thinking right now of Iris Wong. So Iris was a guest on another podcast I did for PDA USA. We were talking about Gestalt language processing and how, thoughts and ideas can come in these big chunks, and it's true. And I feel like pressure in my head to be this linear processor, because so many other things in our culture are linearly presented, but PDA often doesn't process that way or think that way, and we come out in these chunks and ideas that are, also with ADHD, like seemingly disconnected ideas. So I'm just gonna have to accept that, my listeners, like, I guess if it's not a fit for you, it's not a fit for you. But for those who listen, who understand how I'm processing, kudos. Thank you. Welcome for being here. I appreciate you. All that to say is, keep in mind that PDA distress behaviors run the gamut. You could be working with more than one PDA child in your siblings dynamic. And if that's the case, it's another good reason to take a low demand approach for everyone in the family. There's strong reasons to believe this is a genetic thing, that it runs in families. And it doesn't mean you have to get everybody diagnosed per se. It's just recognizing that that applying supports in an equitable way. So even though child A might need one kind of support and child B might need a different support, on the surface that may look like unequal treatment, but as long as each child has a voice in what's going on in their situation, in their sphere, or have control of some part of them, a bubble per se, to keep protection of, then that's good. And as a last thing, I'm going to share a little bit some positives I've seen with myself and my PDA kids. So we've experienced a lot of the extreme fights, the throwing things, some very dangerous situations, and they still sometimes happen. Like every so often, there'll be like a spike in anxiety or fighting. But on the plus side, doing these things that I've suggested, we're talking about a big picture, long-term dynamic, or solution. We're not just talking about fixing immediate problems. There needs to be both a balance between helping an immediate situation resolve or diffuse, and also see how that impacts the bigger picture. And that is what I'm doing my best to describe here. I know it might be inadequate, and I welcome comments on the video itself when I publish it. I welcome thoughts or questions that I can then, address in future podcasts or future live events. But just to say that what I have seen when I picture us as a net, an interconnected an interconnected web where we have this impact on each other. And when I try to explain things in an understanding way to, child B or child C, and when I single out the struggling child for a minute to try to offer support, and when I explain to each other, or even when I advocate for myself. So I am the adult in a situation. I am responsible. I'm more responsible for, of course, how I handle myself. I'm able to troubleshoot my issues where my kids cannot troubleshoot their own issues. Like, I have more brain development, more capacity, et cetera, et cetera. But I sometimes need time to just relax or chill and find ways to do that and make compromises with my kids so that I can also heal. So when we see that we're treating each other like, yes, we may have different capacities, we may have different needs, but helping them understand that that's the lens we're coming from is solving problems and also seeing this as a bigger picture thing. Like, yes, your 6-year-old brother, he may be very explosive right now, but he's not going to be that way forever. Like, he is more explosive now, so we need to help him a little more. But given time, he will be able to react with more self-control, which, by the way, the 6-year-old is now 8 years old, and he is able to show more self-control. In time, that does bear itself out to be true. They have more confidence. My kids have more confidence. I see them troubleshoot with each other. That has got to be one of the weirdest things. It's awesome, but it's honestly kind of strange. I'm like listening, to my kids talk to each other, and they'll be like, "Oh, you want to take a turn playing this game?" They'll be playing Roblox together. They're like, "Do you want to play this game or that game?" And then negotiating peacefully. And sometimes it gets a little escalated, which I will give them some space to work things out. So sometimes as soon as I involve myself trying to fix things between my kids, I add my power dynamic, and it can be worse. This is like, I choose selectively when to involve myself in their conflict now, and I give them a little bit more space to like work it out for themselves. Anyway, but I see them troubleshooting things. I see them working more together. I see them self-advocating more, and we've been doing this for a few years. So it can happen. It can get better. And if there is more going on than just PDA, because I'll mention this. So there's a lot of times more going on than just PDA. There can be food sensitivities, co-occurring conditions, and so on. Just know that those can be troubleshooted along the way as well. So if you have a situation where, your child isn't coming out of recent burnout, or just seemingly they're very like explosive without being able to pinpoint the typical PDA triggers, like if it's disproportionate, just know that you might need to start looking into other things going on as well. And that would be like a doctor's referral and that kind of thing. But anyway, last thing I'll add is, at least as of this airing, I am, like I said, I think I said earlier, can't remember. I am taking some coaching clients. So I did say that. Now I remember. So if you're interested in coaching, you can find the information at PDA insiders.com/coaching. And that's where you can find, you can get a free initial consultation. And then also we have our PDA Insiders Hub. So if you want to join that, whatever works. I try to offer a lot of different things so that we can meet people where they're at, because I know not everybody can afford. It's just there's got to be something equitable because we're all at different places with this. So with that said, I will close this up and wind it up for today. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you guys next week.